Hello. Hi, everybody. Today we are discussing during movie week a movie with Frank Loaiza. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Today we're talking about the 2011 film Detachment. Detachment stars Adrien Brody, Marcia Gay Harden. What a cast for a movie that made $10, basically. It's a award-winning cast. Christina Hendricks, William Peterson, Bryan Cranston, Tim Blake Nelson. My goodness. And it's
James Caan.
James Caan. I forgot about him.
Right.
Wife Danner, Lucy Liu. And it's directed by a pretty accomplished filmmaker, Tony Kaye. He directed American History X. And you could see this. You could see it as you watch this. It is so gritty. It's a film about a substitute teacher, like a long-term sub, who becomes a role model to his students. But I have to say that it's not exactly a heartwarming movie. And I want to say, too, that it's a hard film for me to review because I have some mixed feelings. So I will say that I'm going to go to you right now, Frank, on what you think. I will recommend it. So for the first time in the history of Pod and Deliver, I will recommend it. However, I'm open to one of you changing my minds if you don't agree with me on my recommendation of it. I have hesitations because it's so gritty. It's like Freedom Riders times 10. The students are in your face with language that'll make, the most hardened, barroom brawler blush, right? I mean, that was,
I think when you do recommend it, I think you have to preface it with a warning.
It's really gritty. It's really gritty. And I want to turn to you right now, Frank, but I will say what pushes it over the edge for me in terms of why I would recommend it is, one, the performance by Adrien Brody is very good. And I would actually recommend this movie for any new teacher who comes into the classroom if he's going into a rough environment. Now, here's the irony. We're supposed to, I guess, feel sympathy for him because he's detached, but I thought it worked for him. I thought that detachment, as the title suggests, he's detached emotionally. I thought it worked for him pretty well in that environment because he stood up to those students and he did not get emotionally involved. I think that's a good strategy in certain scenarios. I could talk about more strategies that he used that I thought were pretty good, very gritty, hard to take, in your face language. Overall, I recommend it. What do you think, Frank?
Well, I think that I agree with pretty much everything you said. I'm not an instructor myself, but my wife is, and I can't imagine my wife being in a situation with those students and with that type of verbal abuse and harshness. And but I think, Adrien Brody, excellent actor, and even James Caan was awesome. It's very over the top possibly, but I think that it is realistic in some ways. In certain neighborhoods, I think it is realistic. I think of cities such as South Central. I think of Chicago. I think of Philadelphia. Urban areas that just have youth that are troubled. But as a movie, wow, I didn't know what to expect. Never heard of the movie. Started watching it, and it was a little shocking, some of the scenes. Yeah. But excellent acting for sure.
So overall you give your thumbs up on it? Recommendation?
You recommend it, Frank, as well, right?
I recommend it to somebody who wants to get involved in teaching and possibly somebody who likes acting. I'm somebody who's into film, because Adrien Brody was excellent as an actor. You felt what he was going through. You felt the stress. I mean, the scenes were well depicted and well framed, and you felt for the guy. I mean, you really did. And then they
even though you're not a teacher, Frank, didn't you? I'm sure you appreciate this part too, Jake. Did you appreciate that first day of school when student came up to him and started cussing him out, and he says, "You're free to leave." He did not back down. He was strong, and he was there. If you're choosing to teach there, teach. And if you leave, but you better stand your ground, and he did, and that made him effective.
Yes. He made an example of the first one to be able to talk to the rest of the kids. This is how it's going to be. I do want to share this though. The film starts with this quote by Albert Camus. And never have I felt so deeply at one and the same time so detached from myself and so present in the world. As I watched this, though, I felt like he was present in the world, right? He was involved in a young girl, a prostitute's life. It was very Christ-like how he treated her and with love and genuine love. And she saw him as a father figure, right? Not at first, but that relationship really was strong throughout the film, and how he treated her. I thought it was so beautiful. And then where you see him working with another student who had a crush on him, and he made a couple, I think, mistakes there, but at the same time, he really cared about that student as well. And so you saw some, like you said, Frank, I agree with you. This is a guy who really cared about what he was doing. This is a guy who loved teaching, and he saw what he was doing. He knew substitute teaching was tough, and it was a short time, but he was going to give him one of the instructions. I thought it was funny. The principal told him, "You have a month to get these kids where they need to be." I'm like, what? And he took it. He goes, okay. and he didn't argue. He said, I would have been like, what? I'm a substitute teacher. I mean, I'm going to try to, get things going, but no, he said, okay. And he went into literature, right? And he taught them, and he always had good little lessons for them, right? And they were always paying attention. And by the end, of course, like a lot of these movies we watch, Ruben, right? The kids come around, especially if they see that you really care about them, right? And that you really love them and you really are interested in their lives. One of my favorite scenes, though, is a parent conference night where no parents come, and right away, and throughout the film, you see these teachers, especially, Adrien Brody. He looked like he's being interviewed, right? And you see that more in the beginning of the film. But as you see him sharing, he's like, you know what? Right away, we know what the problem. He did, without saying the parents are the problem. He pretty much alluded, like, now we know why these, education's failing, right? Because he felt like a failure sometimes. But when you're watching her, you're like, no, he's doing his best. And that's what teachers do. They do their best, even though maybe they don't have that support at home, right? And so, yeah, I really was pulling for him. And by the end, some people have criticized the film because of the ending. Like, it's like, hey, it's kind of a downer. But no, I think it's real. And I have no problem giving it a recommendation. Yeah, of course, there's some really heavy scenes in the film where it's not for children. And even though a couple times they don't show anything, but it's happening, and you go, wow, that's a little uncomfortable, right?
I do want to mention that there's a few moments that reflected real life teaching. The issue at one point, a teacher complains and yells. So Frank you mentioned the issue of verbal abuse. This is one of the themes, I think, of the story, is that what do you do when you're being verbally abused? How do you handle it? It's important to some of these issues of being tough, say what you mean, the rule is the rule. But at one point, a parent yells at maybe a counselor or an admin, my kid has a disability. And then the administrator says, he has a behavioral problem. No, he's not getting the services he needs. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. This is a very real thing that teachers hear. And it adds to the stress load that we have to hear. It's become a legal problem. It's become a legal environment in some schools. You have to deal with lawyers now. It isn't what it was, teachers. And I'm really happy that they brought that out, because it's part of what we deal with.
Yeah, I wrote that. So much litigation now. I think I heard that 2 or 3 times in the film where they say, oh, we're going to sue. And you hear that. You hear even kids now, when they joke around sometimes, like, I'm going to sue. I'm like, all right, get in line, But, it's just because they know that that's part of, education now, the litigation piece of it. But Frank, any other thoughts on the film that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I like the balance of the main character, Adrien Brody's character, of the toughness versus the intelligence versus the third aspect of his compassion. I mean, he cared. There was a scene with not a student, or maybe it was a former student on the subway. I don't want to give away too much. A young person. And he had an interaction with her, and at first kind of pushed her away, but then he realizes later that maybe she needs something, so that shows his compassionate side. But it like what Ruben was saying earlier, definitely shows the toughness, that he's not going to back down to a student. He's not going to back down to a threat from anybody. And so you think, oh, you kind of like this guy because he's strong. He has a strong character, and he kicks that kid out, sets the precedent. Like, I'm not going to take anything from any student here, because usually the substitute teachers, they kind of get, a lot of time when I was growing up back in the 80s, it was like, you don't take the substitute teacher seriously because he's not a real teacher, right? Of course not, even though they are. He was like a long-term sub, I guess, in the movie. And I appreciate that they show different sides of him. And then later on, they show kind of the vulnerabilities and such. And I'm not going to get into that yet, but I liked his toughness, and I liked his, like you said, he cared, his compassion.
Do you think, Frank, a lot of it had to do with his upbringing? I mean, like, because I think that's where a lot of the detachment comes from, right? Because he had a very difficult upbringing with a mother who was not there after like 7 or 8 years old, and he really grew up with his grandfather, and it seemed like that made him who he was, where he can't really be attached to maybe even a job that long, right?
Right.
And so I think that made him maybe kind of, I hate to say dead to himself, but detached to himself, but also open and be able to see other people. And he could relate to a lot of these issues. Like, wait a minute, I know how that feels, because he talks about pain and feeling worthless and ugly and fat and all that. And he goes, I get it. And he's speaking to the kids. They're like, yeah. And especially this one young lady played by Meredith, who really hears him and says, wow, he gets me, he sees me.
Right.
Which is true. And but even her pieces, she was a great actress. I can't remember the name of her, Ruben, but she plays Meredith, and I think her name Betty Kay, extremely well.
Very good.
No, that's good. Yeah, I agree.
Very good. Well, maybe a reserved recommendation for Detachment, but nevertheless, definitely worthwhile things to consider in this film. Thank you for watching, everybody. Movie Week. Thank you for joining us, Frank Loaiza.
Thanks, Frank.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.